Welcome. I'm Bob Burke, Chair of the Libertarian Party, Pierce St. Croix. Assemblyman Knudson has announced that he will be holding a listening session on January 13th on 4 bills attempting to address the epidemic of heroin in our community. The information I would like to share will require homework for you, Assemblyman Knudson, before that evening, and I truly hope that you want to make a difference, because you must look at this problem with a different consciousness. In doing so, you will discover that you can not only help those with addiction, but those with what can best be classified as consciousness-related problems such as depression, obesity, and most importantly, post-traumatic stress syndrome. We're still losing far too many soldiers to suicide. The first part of your homework needs to revolve around an understanding of consciousness. You know, when I taught our senior high youth at our church, we painted murals on the walls. This happens to be one of my favorites to introduce the idea of consciousness. You know, for all the work and all the advancements that we've made on understanding the brain and brain science, our understanding of thought creation is still at near zero. If you look at the informational packing, in fact, on medication for depression, even the drug companies admit they do not know how this works. This is the miracle here in the middle that consciousness begins to understand. This scientist is known as Rupert Sheldrake. He is one of the preeminent scientists studying the phenomenon of consciousness. And this picture of him is taken from a TED Talk presentation based on his book, The Science Delusion. This 20-minute presentation is linked down below, and his books can be ordered from Chapter 2 Books, or I'm sure you can go to the library you built and borrow it from them anytime you'd like. But there are literally hundreds of videos on the internet on the subject of consciousness. But I also recommend this one by Antonio Damasio, The Quest to Understand Consciousness. This man is a neuroscientist who's done serious research on the subject, and he lays out some remarkable insight on the topic. In short, this thing right here, our brain, this should be looked at more like a receiver and not a mechanical device generating thought. The creation of thought and its biological manifestations are actually two separate entities. An addiction is a negative feedback loop between the consciousness and the physical reaction of drugs on our consciousness through our physical being. This is more easily explained when you look at morbidly obese individuals and why they are so overweight. Many people who are obese eat because the body produces a positive physical response through the release of endorphins. This relays back to your consciousness a positive feedback. Now, this feedback is only temporary. Once the endorphins wear off, there is a conscious realization that all the food will become fat and adds to their weight. This has a negative conscious feedback of the brain, creating depression. And the brain releases chemicals to communicate that depression back to our reality and our body. In turn, the depression and the depressed individual eats to feel good, and the cycle continues. They are trapped in a negative feedback loop, and most can't see it. Some drugs are much stronger, creating this high, such as heroin, and so the higher the high, the lower the lows, and the more repetitive and difficult that is to break. Showing someone this negative feedback loop is a very large part of the treatment for addiction and consciousness-related conditions. This leads us to new treatment solutions, and I want you to pay very close attention and do your homework on this. According to a 1962 study on the subject, LSD for treatment of alcoholism, quote, 65% of the alcoholics in the experiment stopped drinking for at least a year and a half, which was the duration of the study, after taking 1 dose of LSD. The controlled trial also concluded that less than 25% of the alcoholics who quit drinking in the same period did so from group therapy, and less than 12% quit through general traditional psychotherapy techniques commonly used at the time. In 1962, the government essentially banned new research on the drug, and that was where this hope for a cure ended. Cure, friends, not a treatment. A cure ended. It would be another 30 to 40 years before it would be studied again, but here's what a 2006 paper looking back at that study said of the results. The LSD somehow gave these people experiences that psychologically took them outside of themselves and allowed them to see their own unhealthy behavior more objectively, and then determine to change it, said Dick, who read the researchers' published and private papers and recently interviewed some of the patients involved in the original study, many of whom had not had a sip of alcohol since their single LSD experience 40 years earlier. In April of 2013, there was a conference which released findings from a variety of new studies completed on the subject. The link to their YouTube channel where all of these findings were reported can be found below as well. I dislike government interference for a number of reasons, and this is one of the biggest. Friends, consider how many people in your life have fought an addiction of one kind or another. Consider how many people suffer from depression or mental illness. Consider the damage our wars have inflicted on the lives of our soldiers. How many lives have been lost, families ruined, bright futures destroyed because government decided for you what you can put in your body to heal it. What is sad, Assemblyman Knudson and Senator Harsdorf and Vinehout and the vast majority of you, is that I have to convince at least half of the state's government, most of whom know nothing about consciousness, most of whom know nothing about the nature of addiction, most of whom are still operating an understanding of science equivalent to believing the sun revolves around us before any real solutions can be looked at. Your 4 bills are band-aids over the gaping wound that is an addiction. The patient is bleeding out, and it is time to get serious about this problem and to stop dancing around and beating the drums. The federal government will take a decade to approve any treatment of these compounds if they ever approve it at all. Listen, tell them to go to hell. This is a republic, okay? We have a right to do whatever we want within the borders of our state. And it would please me greatly if our legislatures would stop acting like somehow you already know the answer to all the questions. Go back to Madison and fund this research with copious amounts of taxpayer dollar funding while it's still vogue to do so. It should have been done 4 decades ago, and it's time that we admit that very fallible men and women are making decisions on things that they don't know anything about. Do your homework. People are dying, and the one thing actually standing in the way of a cure, not decades of treatment, is you. Peace. See you on the 13th.